Suicide Squad Isekai is a show that nobody expected to exist, but somehow we hit the Isekai timeline leading us here. Though I want to love this show and simply turn my brain off for it, there is one massive problem breaking my experience. That problem is the horrendous fantasy world they've built. It is, and I'm not being hyperbolic here, the worst fantasy world I have ever seen. If you don't know who wrote the screenplay for Suicide Squad, let me enlighten you. It was written by none other than, now I'm gonna butcher this, Tape Nagatsuki and Eiji Umehara, the creators of one of the best animes ever written, Re:Zero. That's right, Teppei created the light novels for Re:Zero and Eiji worked on some of the episodes for Re:Zero anime. Though Eiji had a hand in the creation of this homunculus, I'll be referring mostly to Teppei alone for two simple facts. He is listed first and I respect his work on Re:Zero. So how did these two Goliaths fumble the bag this hard? Well, that's what this video is all about. I'll be dissecting the core reasons behind why this world is so insufferably bland, starting with the environment. When we first see the fantasy world, it's a very jolting experience. We go from a dark and dirty Earth to a bright and colorful fantasy world. This jolt is actually a good thing. You want the difference between the two environments to be palpable. The moment the characters enter the new world, you want to feel an abrupt and immediate shift. This is something that the story succeeds in, but it's quickly revealed how shallow the world actually is. Within the first episode, we see generic trolls, pigmen, and what looks like an elf. The problem here does not lie with how common these fantasy races are, but rather a list of other factors. These factors being how they act, their clothing, and their weapons. The pigmen act exactly how you'd expect they'd act. They use the weapons you'd expect them to use. They even dress how you would expect them to dress. They lack uniqueness independent from their past iterations. This is also true for the humans we see in this episode. The humans who meet up with the Suicide Squad, including the main leader that looks like an elf, are dressed in generic armor. They wield generic swords and they even ride generic horses. When I first saw that the fantasy world had floating islands, I expected that the characters in said world would have mounts capable of traversing the unique terrain, but they instead have the most uninspired mount ever. Even in Re:Zero, they had cool mounts dependent on which clan they were in. This would all be fine if only they iterated on the idea later, but they never do. In episode 2, we find ourselves in the most uninspired jail ever. It's just the US jail system, but instead of batons, they wield magic clubs. How can you have a fantasy world with fantasy characters and just Control-C, Control-V the jail system? That could have been such a cool moment and area to explore the magic system, or divulge the audience on the lore of the enemy races. The entire episode 2 can be boiled down to this. The Suicide Squad is sent to jail. The princess sends someone to get the Suicide Squad out of jail. When he arrives, the Suicide Squad took over the jail, met Rick Flag, and befriended the inmates. That is all the necessary information needed from the episode, reduced down to 3 sentences. When you are only planning on having 10 episodes released this season, I implore you to use that time effectively. The fantasy world is so boring. Whenever they have either a dream or a flashback to the real world, it's a breath of fresh air, especially in episode 4 when we get to see the Joker and his unique take in the anime. It almost feels like the show is being held back by the fantasy world when I would rather watch more interactions between the Joker and Harley Quinn. Heading back to the fantasy world, you might be thinking the representation of the characters is the only problem, but it runs even deeper than that. The magic system in the world still remains unexplained 5 episodes deep. This is completely abysmal, especially when you realize that the most interesting thing in most fantasy worlds is the magic. Instead, we have some things requiring magic circles while others don't. It's an inconsistency that will inevitably lead to horrible storytelling. Imagine they have to fight some enemy that the enemy creates a poison gas. Well, of course you can just create a magic circle around yourself to purify the poison, why wouldn't you? The fun thing about stories is the fact that whenever a problem presents itself in said story, there's a way for the reader to resolve it. Take for instance any murder mystery ever. The joy of these stories is the possibility that the readers will be able to deduce the killer using only the knowledge presented to them. Or how about Re:Zero? Each episode we see more problems arise in front of a Subaru. It is only after he uses everything at his disposal is he capable of succeeding. The problem is not because the magic is capable of doing multiple things, the problem is that the magic has no conceivable limits in this world. They have not provided a conceivable ceiling or floor for the magic system in the world. Meaning, whenever they want to, they can just pull some random BS off and say, abracadabra, to cure all of their problems. There is nothing stopping them from doing this. One way to fix the magic problem is to provide us with the lore of the world, but they simply refuse to do this. The smallest bit of lore we've gotten was in 2 different episodes, the first one being in episode 2 when the queen refers to the elf-looking knight about how he has this magical armor that makes him incredible. The next one is in episode 4, which showed that the beastmen used to live in the capital until they joined forces with the other enemy races. As of right now, they haven't explained why there are a bunch of floating islands, what caused them to start fighting in the first place, unless I've missed that part, the reason behind the drastic changes in biomes across the different islands, not even how they have the video surveillance in the castle. Bruh, how do you even get to the castle? It's floating! If it's teleportation, then why haven't I seen them TP anywhere else when it would have been much more convenient? Maybe the authors never thought about this, because the entire world has been style over substance this entire time. If you see clips from the show, you would be like, oh, 2 volcanoes in the background, that's so cool. But then you watch the show and realize, oh, they never go there, or mention it, or even look in that direction. Hell, I could put a giant character Fortnite dancing back there and it would hold an equal amount of importance towards the show's core narrative. The reason they put things in this show is because they exist in other, better thought out shows. The reason they don't explain the lore of the world is because they don't care about it. The reason they don't explain anything is because they don't know the reasons themselves. Look, I'm all okay with having a story involving the Suicide Squad entering an isekai, but the isekai part is really the worst part of the entire show. All the characters from the Suicide Squad are perfect and entertaining. They are all standout characters in their own regard, not really counting Shark Boy because he's more of a filler character. Harley Quinn is goofy, fun, and great looking. Clayface is a great character to bridge the gap between DC fans and anime fans. Peacemaker is a badass and menacing. Deadshot is living up to the name. And Rick Flag is the voice of reason amongst a band of criminals. The strongest aspect of this show is the Suicide Squad, which is a good thing, but it really makes me question the purpose of this being an isekai. At this point, it doesn't really matter where these events are taking place, especially since the bad guys in this series are just the other criminals from the real world. What a misstep, making the most interesting heroes and villains both from the real world. There was so much potential in having a new cast of villains the Suicide Squad had to fight against, resulting in them learning more about the world. But the writers would rather take the easy approach. Instead of having villains they would have to build the world around in order to explain their existence, they instead just make them criminals from Earth. I understand the criminals are following the orders of some evil person from that planet, but they haven't been building on that character at all. They instead focus all their time on the Suicide Squad, with 2 of the 5 episodes being borderline filler episodes. Also, the first time we see the main villain, they end up making everyone look like Power Ranger villains. How intimidating! I feel as though I've gotten my thoughts across as thorough as possible, so I won't be boring you with any more commentary. Thank you guys for coming and watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and as always, Johnny.